This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
The cold, misty evening had settled over the marshes of Kent. An eerie shroud enveloped the landscape, casting long shadows across the desolate terrain. Young Pip, an orphan boy with a mop of unruly hair and eyes that seemed too old for his years, trudged through the gloom. His destination, the graveyard where his parents lay buried. The wind whispered through the reeds, carrying with it the briny scent of the distant sea. Pip pulled his threadbare coat tighter around his small frame, shivering not just from the cold, but from the weight of loneliness that seemed to press down on his shoulders. His sister, Mrs. Joe Gargery, ruled their home with an iron fist and a sharp tongue. Only the presence of her husband, the kind-hearted blacksmith Joe, offered Pip any semblance of warmth in his young life. The graveyard loomed before him, a patchwork of weathered stones and overgrown grass. Pip's feet crunched on the gravel path, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. The mist swirled around his ankles, as if trying to root him to the spot, and for a moment, Pip felt a flicker of fear. But he pressed on, drawn by an inexplicable need to be close to the parents he had never known. As he stood before the simple headstones tracing the worn letters with his fingertips, a sudden movement caught his eye. From behind a nearby tombstone, a figure emerged. A man, but unlike any Pip had ever seen. His face was a map of hardship, weathered and gaunt, with eyes that burned with a desperate intensity. Tattered clothes hung from his frame, and the clink of metal betrayed the presence of leg irons. In an instant, the man was upon him. Rough hands seized Pip's shoulders, fingers digging into his flesh. A voice, hoarse and threatening, growled in his ear. "Keep still, you little devil, or I'll cut your throat." Pip's heart hammered against his ribs. Each beat a thunderclap in his ears. His breath came in short, panicked gasps, the taste of fear metallic on his tongue. The man, an escaped convict, Pip realized with a jolt of terror, demanded food and a file to remove his shackles. The threat of violence hung in the air, as tangible as the mist that surrounded them. Yes, sir," Pip stammered, his young mind reeling. "I'll bring you what you need." The convict released him with a shove, melting back into the shadows of the graveyard. His parting words echoed in the darkness. "Remember, boy, not a word to anyone or you'll regret it." Pip fled home, his feet barely touching the ground. That night, sleep eluded him. His dreams were a chaotic swirl of desperate faces and clanking chains, the convict's wild eyes haunting his every thought. As the first light of dawn crept through his window, Pip crept downstairs. The house was silent, save for the gentle snores of Joe and his sister. The pantry, usually forbidden territory, beckoned like a siren's call. With trembling hands, he gathered what food he could. A hunk of bread that felt like a stone in his palm, a wedge of cheese that seemed to accuse him with its pungent scent, a small meat pie that weighed on his conscience like lead. Next, the forge. Joe's domain, once a place of safety and warmth, now felt alien and threatening. Pip's eyes darted about, finally landing on a file. He snatched it up, the metal cool and accusing in his grip. The journey back to the graveyard was a blur of fear and anticipation. Each step felt like a betrayal, each rustle of the grass a potential discovery. The convict was there, huddled against a tombstone, his body racked with shivers that seemed to shake his very soul. Pip approached cautiously, holding out his offerings like peace treaties. The man snatched the food, tearing into it with animal ferocity. Pip watched, a mix of pity and revulsion churning in his stomach. When the convict finally looked up, his eyes held a glimmer of something. Gratitude, perhaps, or a spark of humanity beneath the desperation. "You're a good lad," the convict said gruffly, his voice softer than before. "But remember, not a word. This is our secret, you and me." Pip nodded, unable to speak. The weight of complicity settled over him like a heavy cloak, a burden he knew he would carry for a long time to come. Days passed, each one a struggle to maintain normalcy while the secret gnawed at Pip's insides. Then one Sunday morning, as he sat in church beside Joe, the air thick with incense and drowsy prayers, a commotion erupted outside. The doors burst open, admitting a gust of cold air and a squad of soldiers. They dragged 2 men in chains, escaped convicts, recaptured at last. Pip's breath caught in his throat as he recognized one of the men, his convict. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a current of understanding passing between them. To Pip's amazement, the convict maintained their secret, claiming he had stolen the food himself. As the soldiers marched the prisoners away, Pip felt a strange mix of emotions wash over him. Relief at the danger passing, guilt for his deception, and a lingering sense of connection to the mysterious convict who had protected him in the end. He watched the retreating figures, unaware that this encounter had set in motion a chain of events that would alter the course of his life forever. That night, as Pip lay in bed, his mind swirling with the events of the past few days, a strange feeling of anticipation crept over him. It was as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis, opening up new possibilities he had never before imagined. Little did he know that fate was already weaving its web, and that soon, very soon, an invitation would arrive that would plunge him into a world beyond his wildest dreams or his darkest nightmares. Pip's life was about to change forever. One fateful day, he received a summons to Satis House, the decaying mansion of the wealthy and eccentric Miss Havisham. The boy's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the towering iron gates. They loomed before him like the jaws of some great beast, ready to swallow him whole. Pip swallowed hard, his throat dry with anticipation and fear. With trembling hands, he pushed open the gate. It creaked and groaned, as if protesting this intrusion into its long solitude. The sound echoed in the still air, making Pip jump. He stepped onto the overgrown path, each crunch of gravel beneath his feet seeming to announce his presence to the sleeping house. The air was thick with the scent of decay, rotting leaves, crumbling stone, and something else, something Pip couldn't quite name, but that made his skin crawl. The house itself was a monument to faded glory. Once grand walls now crumbled, their surfaces crawling with ivy that seemed more alive than the structure itself. Windows stared down at him like hollow eyes reflecting nothing but darkness. At the door, Pip's breath caught in his throat. There stood Estella, Miss Havisham's young ward. She was beautiful in a way that made Pip's chest ache, like looking at the sun. But her eyes, they were cold, distant, regarding him as one might look at an insect. "This way," she said, her voice clipped and disinterested. Pip followed, feeling clumsy and out of place. Inside, the house was a tomb. Dust motes danced in the few shafts of light brave enough to penetrate the gloom. The floorboards creaked and sighed under their feet, whispering secrets Pip couldn't understand. And then, they were there. Miss Havisham's room hit Pip like a physical blow. Time itself seemed to have stopped, the clocks all frozen at 20 minutes to 9. In the center of this frozen world sat Miss Havisham herself. She was a ghost, a specter in white. Her wedding dress, once pristine, now hung from her skeletal frame like yellowed skin, tattered and stained. Her eyes burned with a feverish light as they fixed on Pip, making him want to shrink into himself. "Play with him, Estella," Miss Havisham commanded, her voice dry and brittle. "Break his heart." And so the game began. Estella, sharp as a knife and twice as cruel, cut Pip to ribbons with her words. She mocked his rough hands, his common speech, everything that marked him as different from her world. Shame burned hot in Pip's cheeks, but he couldn't look away from Estella. She was like a star, beautiful, distant, and cold, and he was helplessly caught in her orbit. They played cards, each hand dealt feeling like another step in a dance Pip didn't know the steps to. With every cutting remark, every disdainful glance, Pip felt his world shifting, realigning itself around this new axis of desire and inadequacy. All around them, Miss Havisham's relatives hovered like vultures, their false smiles barely concealing their greed. Sarah Pocket, in particular, seemed to ooze insincerity from every pore as she fawned over the wealthy woman. As the day wore on, Pip felt increasingly lost. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving him dizzy and disoriented. The decay that surrounded him was repulsive, yet he found a tragic beauty in it that he couldn't look away from. When at last it was time to leave, Pip stepped out of Satis House feeling as though he'd aged years in a single afternoon. The world outside seemed dull, colorless compared to the vivid nightmare he'd just left. His mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Humiliation at Estella's cruelty, confusion over Miss Havisham's bizarre behavior, and a burning, all-consuming desire to become someone worthy of Estella's affection. As he walked home, each step felt heavier than the last. Pip knew deep in his bones that nothing would ever be the same again. The seeds of discontent had been planted, and his yearning for something more, something greater, had taken root. That night, as Pip lay in bed, his mind raced with visions of Estella's cold beauty and Miss Havisham's decaying world. But as sleep finally began to claim him, a new thought intruded, sharp and unwelcome. Tomorrow he would begin his apprenticeship as a blacksmith. The very idea filled him with a mixture of dread and resentment he'd never felt before. How could he possibly become a common blacksmith now, after glimpsing a world so far beyond his own? As he drifted off, Pip wondered how he could ever reconcile the life laid out before him with the burning ambition now kindled in his heart. The time had come for Pip to begin his apprenticeship as a blacksmith. As he grew older, this new chapter in his life loomed before him, filled with both anticipation and dread. The forge, once a place of childhood wonder, now stood as a symbol of Pip's uncertain future. The air was thick with the scent of hot metal and coal, the heat pressing against his skin like an unwelcome embrace. As he stepped into the workshop, the familiar sights and sounds washed over him. The orange glow of the fire, the hiss of steam, the rhythmic clanging of hammer on anvil. Joe's gentle voice cut through the din. "Ready to get started, Pip?" His kind eyes crinkled at the corners, a stark contrast to the harsh environment around them. Pip nodded, his throat tight. He picked up a hammer, its weight unfamiliar and awkward in his hand. With each strike, a shower of sparks erupted, mirroring the conflicting emotions that flared within him. The work was hard, grueling. Sweat trickled down his back, and his muscles ached with the effort. Days blurred into weeks. Pip's hands, once soft and unblemished, grew calloused and rough. He'd stare at them in the dim light of evening, a constant reminder of the common life he was destined to lead. The gulf between his current station and his dreams yawned wider with each passing day. His visits to Satis house became a lifeline, a tantalizing glimpse into a world beyond the smoke and grime of the forge. The decaying grandeur of Miss Havisham's home, with its musty air and frozen clocks, was intoxicating. And Estella, oh Estella, her beauty was like a knife, sharp and cold, cutting deep into Pip's heart with every glance. Why if it isn't young Pip? Uncle Pumblechook's oily voice grated on Pip's nerves during one such visit. The man's attempts to ingratiate himself with Miss Havisham were as transparent as glass, and just as fragile. Back at the forge, Orlick's presence cast a long shadow. The journeyman's beady eyes followed Pip's every move, his resentment palpable in the air between them. "Think you're better than us, do you?" Orlick would mutter, his words barely audible over the roar of the fire. As summer faded into autumn, Pip felt his relationship with Joe changing. The easy camaraderie of their past seemed to slip away like sand through an hourglass. Pip's shame at his humble beginnings grew like a weed, choking the warmth he once felt for his brother-in-law. Joe's contentment with their simple life, once a comfort, now felt suffocating. The attack on Mrs. Joe came without warning, a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. One moment, she was her usual, sharp-tongued self. The next, she lay silent and changed. The household reeled, struggling to find its footing in this new reality. Enter Biddy, a quiet presence that brought order to their chaos. Her gentle strength was like a balm to Pip's restless spirit. In stolen moments, he'd pour out his heart to her about Estella, about his dreams of becoming a gentleman. "But Pip," Biddy would say, her eyes wise beyond her years, "is that truly what will make you happy?" Her words of caution fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the siren song of Pip's ambitions. The forge, once his whole world, now felt like a prison. Each day the fire seemed to burn a little hotter, the work a little harder, as if testing his resolve. As the leaves turned golden and fell from the trees, Pip felt a change in the air. Something was coming. He could sense it in his bones. His dreams of Estella and a grander life had taken root. growing stronger with each passing day. The simple contentment of his childhood now seemed a distant memory, replaced by a burning desire for something more. Little did Pip know that fate was about to deal him an extraordinary hand. As he stood at the anvil one crisp autumn morning, the door to the forge creaked open, bringing with it a gust of wind and the promise of a future beyond his wildest imaginings. Pip's life stood on the precipice of transformation. On a day that began like any other, fate was about to deal him an extraordinary hand. The village air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant smoke, a familiar backdrop to Pip's simple existence. But as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the worn cobblestones, an unusual tension began to crackle through the air. It was as if the very atmosphere sensed the approach of something momentous. Into this charged scene strode Mr. Jaggers, a formidable London lawyer whose reputation preceded him like a storm front. His presence in the village was as unexpected as snow in summer, and just as unsettling. Jaggers moved with purpose, his polished boots clicking against the stones, each step seeming to reverberate through Pip's very bones. As Jaggers fixed his piercing gaze on Pip, the young man felt a chill run down his spine. The lawyer's eyes were dark pools of knowledge and secrets, hinting at depths Pip could scarcely imagine. When Jaggers spoke, his voice cut through the air like a knife through butter, crisp and unyielding. "Young man," he began, the words falling from his lips with the weight of destiny, "you have come into great expectations." Pip's heart leapt into his throat, pounding so fiercely he feared it might burst from his chest. His palms grew slick with sweat, and he fought the urge to wipe them on his rough work clothes. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, reality shifting beneath his feet like quicksand. With surgical precision, Jaggers laid out the terms of this life-altering arrangement. An anonymous benefactor, shrouded in mystery, wished to pluck Pip from his humble beginnings and mold him into a gentleman. It was as if the heavens themselves had opened up, showering Pip with an opportunity beyond his wildest dreams. "You are to leave for London immediately," Jaggers continued, his tone brooking no argument. His eyes bored into Pip's soul, challenging him to question or refuse. "Maintain the utmost secrecy about your benefactor. Always refer to this person as Mr. Jaggers." Pip's mind whirled like a leaf caught in an autumn gust, struggling to grasp the magnitude of what he was hearing. In his heart, a seed of certainty took root, growing with each passing moment. Surely this was the work of Miss Havisham. Who else could it be? The thought bloomed like a flower in spring, nourished by years of hope and longing. Miss Havisham, in her infinite wisdom and wealth, must be grooming him as a suitable match for Estella. Joy bubbled up inside Pip like a freshwater spring, threatening to overflow. This was it, the validation of all his dreams, the confirmation that he was indeed destined for greater things. The forge, the marshes, the life of a common apprentice, all of it fell away like scales from his eyes, revealing a shining future of wealth and refinement. Yet as Pip's excitement soared, a small voice whispered in the back of his mind. Joe's kind face floated before him, weathered and loving. His sister's stern but familiar presence lingered at the edges of his consciousness. Guilt, sharp and unexpected, pricked at his heart like a thorn. With trembling hands and a voice thick with emotion, Pip accepted his new path. The world seemed to shift beneath his feet, realigning itself to this new reality. London beckoned, a siren song of opportunity and adventure that both thrilled and terrified him. The time came to bid farewell to Joe and his sister. The forge, once his whole world, now seemed small and confining, like a cage he'd outgrown. Joe, simple and profound in his love, embraced Pip with arms strong from years of labor. The smell of iron and coal clung to him, a scent that had once meant home, but now felt like a relic of a past life. "You'll always have a home here, Pip," Joe said, his voice rough with unshed tears. The words were a balm and a burden, highlighting the chasm opening between Pip's past and future. Pip's throat tightened, words of gratitude and apology tangling on his tongue, unable to find voice. As Pip boarded the coach to London, the weight of his decision settled on his shoulders like a new coat, exciting, but not yet comfortable. He looked back at the forge and the marshes, the landscape of his childhood stretching out behind him. The scene blurred, whether from the motion of the coach or the tears in his eyes, he couldn't say. The future lay before him, bright and unknown, filled with the promise of wealth, refinement, and the tantalizing possibility of winning Estella's heart. Yet as the coach rumbled forward, carrying him towards his great expectations, Pip couldn't shake the complex mixture of relief, anticipation, and a twinge of regret for the life and people he was leaving behind. As the village receded into the distance, Pip's heart raced with each turn of the coach's wheels. The familiar gave way to the unknown, each mile bringing him closer to a new life and further from everything he'd ever known. The coach crested a hill, and suddenly the sprawling expanse of London appeared on the horizon, a maze of buildings and smokestacks reaching toward the sky. Pip's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the moment everything would change. As the coach began its descent toward the city, a mixture of exhilaration and terror washed over him. What adventures awaited him in those bustling streets? What challenges would he face? And most importantly, would he find the life he'd always dreamed of? Or would his great expectations crumble to dust in the harsh light of reality? With these questions swirling in his mind, Pip steeled himself for the journey ahead. The coach picked up speed, hurtling towards London and the unknown future that awaited him there. Pip stepped off the carriage, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The bustling streets of London stretched before him, a world away from the quiet marshes of his childhood. The city hit him like a tidal wave, overwhelming his senses. The air was thick with the acrid smell of coal smoke and the sour stench of sewage, a far cry from the clean, salty breeze of the marshes. Voices shouted and argued, blending with the constant clop-clop of horses' hooves on cobblestones. Towering buildings of brick and stone loomed over him, their shadows creating a maze of dark alleys and hidden corners. Pip felt like a leaf caught in a whirlwind, spinning and tumbling through this new world. He watched wide-eyed as finely dressed ladies with parasols delicately stepped around grimy street urchins, begging for pennies. The contrast was stark, a visual representation of the social divide he hoped to bridge. Under Matthew Pockett's guidance, Pip's transformation began. Matthew, with his kind eyes crinkling at the corners and his patient, steady voice, opened up new worlds to the young man. Books that had once seemed impenetrable fortresses now became gateways to adventure and knowledge. Numbers, once a source of frustration, now danced to Pip's command as Matthew unraveled the mysteries of mathematics. But it was Herbert Pocket, Matthew's son, who truly became Pip's compass in this unfamiliar terrain. Herbert's laugh was like sunshine breaking through London's perpetual fog, warm and infectious. "You see, old chap," he'd say, his eyes twinkling with mischief as he demonstrated the proper way to hold a teacup. "It's all about the little things." Their home in Barnard's Inn was far from the grand mansions Pip had imagined. The wallpaper peeled like old skin, revealing the building's bones beneath. Drafts whistled through gaps in the windows, playing eerie melodies on cold nights. Yet to Pip, it was a castle of possibilities. Each creak of the floorboards was the sound of freedom, each dusty corner a treasure trove of potential adventures. Pip threw himself into his new life with the fervor of a man possessed. He shed his old clothes like a snake shedding its skin, replacing rough cloth with fine-tailored suits that felt alien against his skin. His tongue, once thick with the accent of the marshes, now wrapped itself around cultured tones and sophisticated phrases. He spread his new wings, basking in the admiration of his peers, but with each soaring flight, he left a trail of dead in his wake. Visits to Sada's house were like plunging into the icy waters of the marsh in winter. Estella, her beauty as sharp and cold as a diamond, regarded him with the same indifference that both wounded and captivated him. Miss Havisham, a living ghost in her tattered wedding dress, watched their interactions with a smile that never reached her eyes, as if she alone understood some cruel, cosmic joke. It was during one of these visits that Pip first encountered Bentley Drummle. Drummle was everything Pip feared becoming: coarse, brutish, and utterly sure of his place in the world. Yet it was Drummle who caught Estella's eye, his wealth a brighter lure than Pip's newly acquired polish. Jealousy coiled in Pip's stomach like a venomous snake, its poison seeping into every thought. As Pip climbed the social ladder, he found himself looking down on the very people who had shaped him. When Joe visited London, Pip's cheeks burned with shame at his friend's rough manners and ill-fitting clothes. The hurt in Joe's eyes as Pip hurried him out haunted the young man's dreams, a silent accusation that echoed in the quiet hours of the night. Despite the trappings of success, the fine clothes that still felt stiff on his frame, the gentleman's clubs where he never quite felt he belonged, the sophisticated conversation that sometimes left him grasping for words, Pip felt a growing emptiness. It was as if he'd built a beautiful house of cards, impressive to look at, but hollow inside, ready to collapse at the slightest breeze. As the London fog swirled around him, thick and choking, Pip found himself increasingly dissatisfied. He stood at a crossroads, torn between the glittering promises of his new life and the simple truths of his upbringing. The fog seemed to seep into his very soul, leaving him morally adrift in a limbo of his own making. But even as Pip grappled with these inner conflicts, a new unease began to creep over him. Shadows seemed to linger at the corners of his vision, disappearing when he turned to look. Whispers and footsteps echoed behind him in empty streets. A sense of being watched, of some unseen presence hovering just out of sight, began to gnaw at the edges of his newfound confidence. As night fell and Pip made his way back to Barnard's Inn, he couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed new life was about to be shaken to its very foundations. Pip's new life as a gentleman was not as carefree as he had imagined. A mysterious presence had begun to cast a shadow over his newfound status, leaving him increasingly uneasy. The once enchanting cobblestone streets of London now felt like a maze of secrets, each corner hiding potential threats. Pip's heart raced as he caught fleeting glimpses of a shadowy figure in crowded marketplaces, its form melting into the sea of faces before he could get a proper look. Even near his lodgings, in the quiet of twilight, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, an unseen gaze prickling his skin. Pip's mind whirled with possibilities. Could it be Miss Havisham, secretly checking on her protégé? The thought sent a thrill of hope through him, warming his chest like a sip of brandy. But darker ideas lurked in the corners of his imagination, as persistent as the London fog. Perhaps some figure from his past, come to tear down the fragile new world he'd built. Days bled into weeks, the mystery figure a constant shadow on the edges of Pip's consciousness. He found himself looking over his shoulder more often, his newfound status as a gentleman feeling as delicate as a soap bubble, ready to burst at the slightest touch. One night, as Pip sat in his lodgings, a storm raged outside. Rain lashed against the windows like angry fists, while wind howled through the narrow streets, carrying whispers of secrets about to be revealed. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, mirroring the turmoil in Pip's mind. A knock at the door cut through the tempest, sharp and insistent. Pip's heart leapt into his throat, pounding so hard he could feel it in his fingertips as he reached for the doorknob. With a deep breath, he opened it, coming face to face with a ghost from his past. There, dripping rainwater onto the threshold, stood Abel Magwitch. The years had weathered his face further, etching deep lines around his mouth and eyes, but those eyes, sharp and knowing, were unmistakable. It was the convict Pip had helped in the graveyard all those years ago, now standing in his London lodgings like a specter risen from the marshes. "Well, Pip, my boy," Magwitch said, his voice rough as gravel, "ain't you going to welcome an old friend?" The room spun as Pip stumbled backward, his mind reeling. Magwitch, seemingly oblivious to Pip's shock, stepped inside, shaking off the rain like a dog. He looked around the room with undisguised pride, drinking in the signs of Pip's gentlemanly life, the fine furnishings, the well-stocked bookshelf, the elegant writing desk. "Look at you," Magwitch said, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and something else. Something that made Pip's stomach churn. "A proper gentleman, just like I always knew you'd be." Pip's voice, when he found it, came out as a strangled whisper. "You're my benefactor?" Magwitch nodded, a smile spreading across his weathered face. "Made my fortune in Australia, I did, and every penny of it was for you, my boy, to make you a gentleman." The revelation crashed over Pip like a wave, threatening to drown him. His entire world, built on dreams of Miss Havisham's plans and Estella's hand, crumbled around him like a sandcastle at high tide. In its place stood this rough-hewn man, beaming with pride and gratitude for a small kindness done years ago. Pip's emotions warred within him: disgust at the criminal source of his fortune, fear for what Magwitch's return might mean, and a grudging sense of obligation to the man who had given him everything. He looked at Magwitch, seeing him with new eyes, not as a fearsome convict, but as a man who had sacrificed everything for him. "Why?" Pip managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Magwitch's eyes softened, the hardness of years melting away for a moment. "Because you showed kindness to a wretch like me when no one else would. You gave me hope, Pip, and I wanted to give you the world in return." As the night wore on, with the storm still raging outside, Pip grappled with the harsh realities of his situation. His great expectations, once shining and full of promise, now felt tarnished and hollow, like fool's gold. He had to confront the truth that his entire life had been built on a lie, and that the dreams he'd cherished for so long were nothing but self-delusion. Magwitch, oblivious to Pip's inner turmoil, continued to express his joy and pride. He saw Pip as the son he never had, his life's work come to fruition. But for Pip, each word of praise was a twist of the knife, a reminder of how far he'd strayed from the simple, honest boy he once was. As dawn broke, painting the sky in muted grays, Pip found himself at a crossroads. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with moral dilemmas and potential danger. He knew he must protect Magwitch, whose return to England as a deported felon put him at risk of death if discovered. But in doing so, Pip had to confront the ugliness at the heart of his own transformation. The storm outside had passed, but the tempest in Pip's heart raged on. As he looked at Magwitch, snoring softly in a chair by the fire, Pip realized that his journey of self-discovery was far from over. The true test of his character lay not in the trappings of gentlemanly life, but in how he chose to move forward from this moment. With a heavy sigh, Pip turned to face the new day, knowing that he must now grapple with the true nature of his great expectations and the man he had become. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the window, illuminating the sleeping form of Magwitch, a chilling realization dawned on Pip. His world had been irrevocably changed, and the consequences of this revelation were only beginning to unfold. The revelation of Magwitch as his benefactor shattered Pip's world. It forced him to confront the harsh realities behind his great expectations, leaving him reeling and confused. In the days that followed Magwitch's dramatic return, London's once familiar streets seemed to twist and turn like a labyrinth, hiding dark secrets in every shadow. The cobblestones echoed Pip's hurried footsteps as he navigated this new, threatening landscape. The air felt thick with tension, as if the very city conspired to keep Magwitch's secret. Pip's small room became a confessional booth as Magwitch's gravelly voice filled the space, each word a hammer blow to Pip's carefully constructed dreams. "We were partners, Pip," Magwitch said, his eyes distant with memory. "Partners in crime, until he turned on me like a rabid dog." The betrayal that led to Magwitch's transportation to Australia hung in the air like a noose, tightening around Pip's neck with each passing moment. Then came the revelation that sent Pip's world spinning off its axis. Magwitch, his voice barely above a whisper, revealed he was Estella's father. The words hung in the air like smoke, choking Pip with their implications. Miss Havisham, the eccentric puppet master he had believed responsible for his fortune, had nothing to do with it at all. As if this weren't enough, Pip learned that Estella's mother was none other than Molly, Mr. Jagger's enigmatic housekeeper. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening clarity. Molly had been accused of murder, but acquitted with Jagger's help, a fact that now took on new significance. Pip's emotions roiled like a stormy sea, threatening to pull him under. He felt revulsion towards Magwitch, the rough criminal who had upended his life, but also a growing sense of responsibility. The man had sacrificed everything for him, driven by a deep, almost desperate affection that Pip was only now beginning to understand. As the days wore on, Pip found himself seeing Magwitch in a new light. The convict's weathered face told a story of hardship and survival, of a life shaped by circumstances beyond his control. It was as if scales had fallen from Pip's eyes, allowing him to see the humanity in this man he had once feared. Meanwhile, the practical realities of his situation began to press in on Pip like the walls of a shrinking room. His financial future, once so bright and assured, now teetered on the brink of ruin. The legal complications of inheriting money from a deported felon loomed large, casting a shadow over everything he had taken for granted. In his desperation, Pip turned to Herbert, confiding the whole sordid tale. Together they huddled over maps and timetables, their whispered conversations fraught with tension. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls, mirroring the dark plans they were forced to make for Magwitch's safety and potential escape from England. Driven by a need for answers, Pip confronted Mr. Jaggers. The lawyer's office, once a place of promise and possibility, now felt like a confessional. The smell of leather-bound books and musty papers seemed to close in around him as Jaggers confirmed the truth about Estella's parentage with his usual clinical detachment, his words cutting through Pip's last illusions like a surgeon's scalpel. As the full weight of these revelations settled on Pip's shoulders, he found himself reevaluating everything he had once held dear. His social aspirations, once so important, now seemed as insubstantial as mist. The people he had looked down upon, like Dear Joe, took on new importance in his eyes. Pip's character began to shift, like a ship changing course on a vast ocean. He moved away from his selfish ambitions, his heart opening to a more mature and compassionate outlook. The glittering world of his great expectations faded, replaced by a deeper understanding of true worth and genuine connection. In this crucible of change, Pip started to see the hollowness of his former dreams and the true value of the people he had once dismissed. This period marked a profound transformation in Pip's character, as he began the journey from a self-centered young man to someone capable of real empathy and understanding. As night fell and Pip lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind raced with the enormity of the situation. The weight of Magwitch's fate pressed down on him, suffocating in its intensity. He knew that come morning he would have to make a decision that would alter the course of both their lives forever. With a deep breath, Pip steeled himself for what was to come, knowing that the path ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. Pip's initial revulsion towards Magwitch began to fade away. He made the decision to help the convict escape England, recognizing both the danger Magwitch faced and his own moral obligation. The weight of this choice settled on Pip's shoulders like a heavy cloak, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. With a heart as heavy as lead, he turned to Herbert, his trusted friend, for help. Together they huddled in the dim light of Pip's lodgings, voices hushed as they crafted an intricate plan to smuggle Magwitch out of the country by river. Days blurred into weeks as they meticulously prepared. The scheme consumed their every waking moment, haunting their dreams when sleep finally claimed them. The Thames, once a familiar sight, now loomed as both savior and potential betrayer. Its murky waters held secrets and dangers in equal measure. Pip spent countless hours on the river, his hands blistering as he learned to row. Each stroke was a mixture of determination and dread, the oars cutting through the water with a soft splash that seemed to echo his racing heartbeat. The familiar London skyline took on a sinister aspect, buildings hunched like watchful sentinels along the banks. As the days ticked by, a palpable tension settled over them, like a thick, choking fog. Pip's nerves jangled at every shadow, every unexpected sound. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, his skin prickling with unease. The ghost of Compeyson, Magwitch's old criminal associate, seemed to lurk around every corner of London, adding a sinister edge to their already dangerous plot. "We're being followed," Pip whispered to Herbert one evening, his eyes darting nervously. "I can feel it." Herbert squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "We've been careful, Pip. It's just nerves playing tricks on you." But Pip couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that clung to him like a second skin. Despite the looming threat, Pip found his feelings towards Magwitch shifting like the tides. The old convict's gruff exterior began to crack, revealing glimpses of a man shaped by hardship and regret. During their clandestine meetings, Pip caught moments of vulnerability in Magwitch's weathered face, a softening around the eyes that spoke of a lifetime of pain and longing. "You're a good lad, Pip," Magwitch said one night, his voice rough with emotion. "Better than I deserve." Pip's initial disgust melted away, replaced by a reluctant fondness that both confused and comforted him. He found himself wondering about the life Magwitch might have led under different circumstances. Finally, the night of the escape arrived, dark and foreboding. The air was thick with anticipation, the smell of the river strong and pungent. Pip's heart hammered in his chest as he, Herbert, and Magwitch slipped down to the riverbank. The Thames stretched before them, a black ribbon cutting through the heart of the sleeping city. They pushed off into the current, the oars cutting through the water with muffled splashes. Every sense was heightened: the creak of the boat, the rasp of Magwitch's breathing, the distant rumble of the city, all seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Familiar landmarks loomed out of the darkness like specters. Bridges, wharves, and warehouses that Pip had known all his life now seemed alien and threatening. Each bend in the river brought fresh anxiety, the fear of discovery a constant companion. "Stay low," Pip hissed, his knuckles white on the oars. "We're almost past the worst of it." But fate had other plans. Their worst fears materialized in the form of another boat, its outline barely visible in the gloom. Pip's heart leapt into his throat, his palms slick on the oars. The carefully laid plan began to unravel like a poorly knitted sweater, each passing moment bringing them closer to disaster. As they struggled against the current and their unseen pursuers, Pip's mind raced. He knew with a sickening certainty that Compayson was among those giving chase. This was no longer just about Magwitch's freedom. It was a deadly game of old scores and bitter vendettas. The fate of Magwitch and the culmination of Pip's great expectations hung in the balance as they fought against the river and their enemies. The Thames, once their ally, now seemed to conspire against them, its dark waters holding the key to their salvation or their doom. Suddenly, a shout pierced the night. "There they are!" The pursuing boat surged forward, closing the gap with alarming speed. Pip's world narrowed to the burn in his muscles, the strain of the oars, the pounding of his heart. He could hear Magwitch's labored breathing behind him, feel Herbert's desperation as they both pulled with all their might. But it wasn't enough. The other boat drew alongside, and in the dim light, Pip caught a glimpse of Compayson's face, twisted with hatred and triumph. Time seemed to slow as Magwitch rose, a low growl emanating from his throat. The two men locked eyes, years of enmity crackling between them like lightning. In that moment, Pip knew with terrifying clarity that this night would end in blood. As Magwitch lunged towards his old enemy, the boats rocked violently, and the dark waters of the Thames reached up to claim them all. The escape attempt ended in chaos and violence. Magwitch and Compayson found themselves locked in a brutal struggle in the river's icy depths. The night air crackled with tension, heavy and oppressive. Pip stood on the shore, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. The murky water churned and frothed as the two men grappled, their hatred for each other fueling their strength. Muffled shouts and the sound of thrashing bodies pierced the eerie silence, punctuated by the distant, ominous calls of approaching authorities. Suddenly, Magwitch's head broke the surface. He gasped for air, his face a mask of pain and grim determination. But his moment of triumph was fleeting. Lantern light cut through the darkness like accusing fingers, and Pip's stomach dropped as he realized their plan had failed. As the authorities dragged Magwitch from the water, his body battered and broken, Pip felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Guilt, sorrow, and a newfound respect for the man he once feared swirled within him. Watching Magwitch being led away, Pip made a silent vow to stand by him, recognizing the unwavering devotion the convict had shown. Days blurred together, and Pip found himself at Sada's house. The air hung thick with the scent of decay and forgotten dreams. Miss Havisham sat in her tattered wedding dress, a living relic of a bygone era. The fireplace crackled softly, its warm light a stark contrast to the cold emptiness of the room. In a heartbeat, everything changed. A stray spark, like a malevolent fairy, danced from the fireplace and landed on Miss Havisham's dress. The dry, ancient fabric ignited instantly, transforming the old woman into a human torch. Time seemed to slow as Pip's world narrowed to this single terrifying moment. With a strength born of desperation, Pip grabbed a heavy tablecloth and wrapped it around Miss Havisham's burning form. They fell to the ground, Pip rolling her body to smother the flames. The acrid smell of burning fabric and flesh filled his nostrils, making him gag. His hands seared with pain, but he fought on, determined to save her. When the fire was finally out, Miss Havisham lay still, her once pristine dress now a charred ruin. As life ebbed from her body, her eyes found Pip's, filled with a mixture of agony and newfound clarity. In her final moments, remorse poured from her like a flood, washing away years of bitterness. "Forgive me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Forgive me for what I've done to you. To Estella." Her words hung in the air, a testament to the destructive power of vengeance and the liberating force of forgiveness. As Miss Havisham's life slipped away, Pip felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The web of expectations and manipulations that had ensnared him for so long began to unravel. Meanwhile, Magwitch's fate hung in the balance. The trial was a blur of stern faces and damning evidence. When the sentence came, it fell like a hammer blow: death. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Weakened by his injuries and the strain of imprisonment, Magwitch's health deteriorated rapidly. Pip visited him faithfully, watching as the once fearsome convict grew frail and vulnerable. In those quiet moments, a bond formed between them, stronger than blood. On his deathbed, Magwitch found a peace he had never known in life. Pip's forgiveness and affection washed over him like a soothing balm. His weathered face softened as Pip spoke of Estella, assuring him that his daughter was alive and well. "Thank you, dear boy," Magwitch murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "You've given an old man peace." As Magwitch drew his final breath, Pip felt a profound shift within himself. The man he had once viewed with disgust and fear had become a father figure, teaching him the true meaning of loyalty and love. These tragic events brought a series of revelations and closures, forcing Pip to confront the consequences of his expectations and the true nature of the relationships in his life. As he stood there, hands still bearing the scars of his heroic act, Pip realized that his great expectations had led him down an unexpected path, one of growth, forgiveness, and ultimately self-discovery. But as the weight of recent events settled upon him, Pip felt a strange heaviness in his limbs. His vision blurred, and the room seemed to tilt and spin. A sudden wave of exhaustion washed over him, and he stumbled, barely catching himself on the edge of a nearby table. As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, Pip's last coherent thought was a vague wonder at the burning sensation spreading through his body. The recent events had taken a severe toll on Pip's health. Overwhelmed by grief, guilt, and the collapse of his great expectations, he succumbed to a dangerous fever. London's oppressive heat seemed to press down on Pip's chest as he lay in his dimly lit room. The air was thick with the acrid smell of illness and the faint, sour odor of unwashed linens. Sweat-soaked sheets clung to his trembling form, a damp prison from which he couldn't escape. In his feverish state, Pip's mind became a whirlpool of memories and nightmares. Miss Havisham's tattered wedding dress floated before his eyes, its yellowed lace transforming into Estella's icy beautiful face. Her features melted away, revealing Magwitch's weathered visage, eyes filled with a mixture of hope and desperation. "No, please," Pip mumbled, his parched lips barely moving. The sickness gripped him like an iron vice, squeezing the strength from his body. He tossed and turned, fighting invisible demons. In these dark moments, when the fever burned hottest, Pip felt utterly alone. The vast, uncaring city of London seemed to swallow him whole, leaving nothing but a hollow shell. But fate hadn't abandoned him entirely. Like a lighthouse beam cutting through a stormy night, Joe Gargery arrived. The gentle blacksmith set aside any lingering hurt over Pip's past behavior and came to London with a heart full of love and determination. Joe's presence was a soothing balm to Pip's troubled soul. His calloused hands, speaking of years of honest toil, tenderly cared for the sick young man. Joe's sturdy frame became a constant, reassuring presence in the oppressive sick room. There, there, old chap, Joe would murmur, his voice as gentle as a summer breeze. You'll be right as rain in no time, you will. Day and night Joe ministered to Pip's needs. He cooled the raging fever with damp cloths, the water's soft patter a rhythmic counterpoint to Pip's labored breathing. Joe administered bitter medicines with unwavering patience, his quiet words of comfort seeming to reach Pip even in the depths of his delirium. As the fever slowly loosened its grip, Pip began to emerge from the fog of his illness. The world came into sharper focus, and he became increasingly aware of Joe's constant presence. The realization of Joe's unwavering loyalty struck Pip like a physical blow, forcing him to confront the stark contrast between Joe's simple goodness and his own misguided ambitions. Lying in his sickbed, too weak to do more than observe and reflect, Pip embarked on a journey of the soul. The quiet hours of convalescence became a time of deep introspection. The glittering facade of his great expectations crumbled away, revealing the hollow core of his pursuits. Pip's heart ached as he remembered how he had scorned Joe and his humble origins, chasing after the illusion of gentility and social status. Now, as he watched Joe's selfless care, he began to understand that true nobility had nothing to do with wealth or social standing. It resided in the heart, in acts of kindness and loyalty, like those Joe demonstrated every day. The road to recovery was long and arduous. Each small victory, a sip of broth kept down, a few minutes spent sitting up, felt like a monumental achievement. Pip found himself appreciating the simple things he had once taken for granted. The warmth of sunlight streaming through the window, painting patterns on the worn floorboards, the comfort of a clean nightshirt against his skin, the gentle strength in Joe's hands as he helped Pip sit up. As his strength slowly returned, Pip's resolve grew. He vowed to make amends for his past mistakes, to show Joe and others the gratitude they deserved. The hollow ambitions that had driven him for so long now seemed as insubstantial as the morning mist, dissipating in the light of his newfound understanding. Pip's recovery became a rebirth of sorts, a chance to start anew with a clearer perspective on what truly mattered in life. As he took his first tentative steps around the room, leaning on Joe's steady arm, Pip felt not just physically stronger, but morally fortified as well. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, a familiar sound that now seemed a whisper of home and belonging. With each passing day, as Pip regained his strength, he also regained a clearer perspective on what truly mattered in life. The experience had transformed him, setting the stage for the next chapter of his journey, one that promised to be guided by gratitude, honesty, and a newfound appreciation for the simple virtues he had once overlooked. As Pip stood by the window, feeling the cool breeze on his face for the first time in weeks, a sudden realization struck him. His journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. With a mixture of anticipation and trepidation, Pip turned to Joe and said, "I think it's time I went home." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of all that lay ahead. What would he find when he returned to the village he had so eagerly left behind? And more importantly, was he ready to face the consequences of his past actions? Pip's recovery marked a turning point in his journey. With renewed determination, he decided to return to his village, ready to face the consequences of his past actions. The familiar landscape of his childhood came into view, stirring a strange mix of emotions within him. The village stood frozen in time, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of experiences that had shaped his recent years. As he drew closer, the distant clanging of metal on metal from the forge echoed through the air. That sound, once a symbol of confinement, now stirred an unexpected longing in his heart. Pip's feet carried him along the worn path, each step feeling like a journey back in time. The marshes stretched out before him, a patchwork of greens and browns under the vast open sky. He inhaled deeply, the earthy scent of his youth filling his lungs. Memories flooded his mind like the tide rushing over the mudflats, bringing with them a bittersweet ache. His heart pounded like a blacksmith's hammer as he approached his old home. With a trembling hand, Pip knocked on the door. The weight of his past mistakes pressed heavily on his shoulders as he waited, his breath catching in his throat. When Joe's familiar face appeared, a mixture of surprise and warmth in his eyes, Pip felt a lump form in his throat. "Joe," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've come to ask for your forgiveness." Without a word, Joe's strong arms enveloped him in an embrace that spoke volumes. The rough fabric of Joe's shirt against Pip's cheek, the familiar smell of smoke and iron, all brought a rush of comfort he hadn't realized he'd been missing. As they parted, Pip caught sight of Biddy standing in the doorway, her gentle smile a balm to his troubled soul. The revelation of Joe and Biddy's marriage hit Pip like a sudden gust of wind, momentarily knocking the breath from his lungs. A fleeting image of a future he had vaguely imagined with Biddy flickered and faded in his mind. Yet as he observed the quiet contentment that radiated from the couple, their hands intertwined, a genuine happiness for them blossomed within him. In the days that followed, Pip immersed himself in the simple life he had once scorned. He stood beside Joe in the forge, the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil, a soothing melody. Together they shaped hot metal, just as life had shaped Pip. Each strike seemed to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart, revealing the boy he once was beneath the man he had become. Long walks through the marshes with Biddy allowed for honest conversations. The vast open landscape mirrored the openness of their dialogue as Pip poured out his gratitude and remorse. The soft squelch of mud beneath their feet and the cry of distant birds punctuated their words. "I was blind," he confessed, watching a heron take flight from a nearby pool, its wings cutting through the misty air. Blinded by ambition and false notions of what it meant to be a gentleman. Biddy's kind eyes held no judgment. "We all must find our own path, Pip. What matters is where it leads us in the end." As the sun set on his visit, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Pip felt a sense of peace settle over him. The realization that he could no longer rely on Magwitch's forfeited fortune was not a burden, but a liberation. A new chapter of his life stretched before him, full of possibility. With a firm handshake to Joe, feeling the familiar calluses on his old friend's palm, and a warm hug for Biddy, breathing in the scent of fresh-baked bread that always seemed to cling to her, Pip prepared to leave once more. This time, however, he carried with him not just memories, but a profound appreciation for his roots and a clear sense of purpose. The path ahead led to Herbert's firm abroad, where honest labor and true friendship awaited. As Pip took his first steps towards this new future, he felt lighter, as if the marshland mist had cleared, revealing a horizon bright with promise. Yet as he reached the crest of the hill overlooking the village, a sudden gust of wind brought with it a chill that seemed to seep into his bones. The sky, moments ago aflame with the dying sun, now darkened ominously. Pip couldn't shake the feeling that while one chapter of his life had closed, another, perhaps more challenging, was about to begin. What trials and tribulations awaited him in the years to come? Only time would tell. Years passed like leaves on a gentle breeze. Pip toiled diligently abroad, slowly but surely repaying his debts and finding contentment in a simpler life. The grand aspirations of his youth faded, replaced by a quiet satisfaction in honest work and personal growth. In the dim light of his modest lodgings, Pip's quill scratched against parchment, a comforting rhythm in the stillness of the night. Each letter to Joe and Biddy was a lifeline, bridging the vast distance between them. As he wrote, Pip could almost smell the warm, smoky air of the forge, hear Joe's hearty laugh, and feel Biddy's gentle presence. His experiences had humbled him, like a sapling bending in the wind, teaching him to value the sturdy roots of hard work and genuine connections over the fleeting allure of social status. The day of his return to England dawned crisp and clear. Pip's heart raced as his feet carried him along familiar paths, now overgrown and wild. He found himself standing before the empty plot where Satis House once stood. The grand manor, now demolished and cleared, existed only in his memories. As he pushed through the overgrown garden, the rustling leaves whispered of days long past. The scent of wild roses and damp earth filled his nostrils, a stark contrast to the musty, decaying smell he remembered from his youth. Memories flooded back, as vivid as the wildflowers that now claimed the abandoned grounds. He could almost see the ghost of his younger self, wide-eyed and naive, standing in Miss Havisham's decaying parlor. Lost in reverie, Pip almost missed the solitary figure standing amidst the ruins. His heart skipped a beat as recognition dawned. Estella. Time had touched her, as it had touched him, but her beauty remained, now tempered with a gentle wisdom that softened her once sharp edges. Estella, he breathed, the name both a question and a greeting. She turned, a small smile playing on her lips. Pip, she replied, her voice carrying the weight of years and experiences. As they drew closer, Pip noticed the subtle changes in her demeanor. Gone was the haughty girl who had tormented his heart. In her place stood a woman who had weathered life's storms. Widowed after an unhappy marriage to Bentley Drummel, Estella had been forged anew in the crucible of hardship. They began to walk together through the overgrown path, their footsteps in sync. The garden, once manicured and controlled, now grew wild and free, a fitting metaphor for their own journeys. Brambles caught at their clothes as if the past was trying to hold them back, but they pressed on, side by side. I've thought of this place often, Estella said, her eyes distant, of the person I was, shaped by Miss Havisham's bitterness. Pip nodded, understanding etched on his face. We were both pawns in a game we didn't understand. As they talked, the years of pain and misunderstanding began to melt away. Estella spoke of her remorse, her voice catching as she recounted the cruelty she had once wielded so carelessly. Pip, in turn, shared his own journey of self-discovery, the lessons learned through hardship and humility. Their conversation flowed like a gentle stream, winding through the garden of their shared past. With each step, they seemed to shed the weight of their former selves, emerging lighter, freer. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. Pip found himself marveling at the twist of fate that had brought them together again. Here, in the very place where their story had begun, they stood as equals, no longer the manipulated children they once were. Estella's hand found his, a gesture both tentative and filled with possibility. The touch sent a warmth through Pip, not the feverish longing of his youth, but a gentle, steady glow of understanding. Her fingers were calloused now, a testament to the life she had lived, so different from the soft, pampered hands of her youth. We've come a long way from the children we were in this garden, Pip mused, his voice soft with wonder. Estella nodded, her eyes meeting his. Perhaps now we can truly see each other, without the distortions of the past. As they walked hand in hand through the mists of the old garden, there was a sense of something new blossoming between them. Their conversation, filled with shared experiences and mutual understanding, hinted at the potential for a future relationship, one built on a foundation far stronger than the illusions of youth. The sun dipped below the horizon, and a cool breeze rustled through the leaves. It was time to leave this place of memories behind. As they stepped out onto the road beyond, the future stretched before them, full of possibility. Both Pip and Estella had finally freed themselves from the shadows of their past, ready to face whatever lay ahead with newfound wisdom and compassion. Pip took one last look at the overgrown garden, now bathed in the soft light of dusk. He squeezed Estella's hand gently, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. The ghosts of the past seemed to recede, giving way to hope and redemption. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, two souls who had found their way back to each other, stronger and wiser for the journey.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.